Hey, it's Tom from Tom's Toons. We just picked up this 1996 JC Dolphin. It's a 20-foot boat, 8-foot wide. Something I'm excited about on this boat is we're gonna take you along for more of the details in the teardown as well as the rebuild, and try to show you in one longer video more of what goes into restoring an old boat like this. We're gonna give this new everything, including a new 60 horse Tohatsu outboard. It's gonna get new vinyl flooring, new plywood. It's a, 26-year-old boat now. It's time for an update. Let's climb in, take a look at the seating arrangement now, because this is kind of a fishing style pontoon and we're gonna eliminate that. And this is gonna be a load a bunch of people in and go for a cruise pontoon. Pretty agile. Pretty standard setup for a fishing style boat. There were several pedestal seats. We had a kind of an L seat here. Cool thing about this boat, for that age, is it did have, a big storage area in the back, kind of a layout pad here. So pretty unique, but kind of a neat design for a 1996 boat. It will get a new custom sun deck. We'll have upholstered to go with the premium seats that this boat's getting. The console here, not a bad console setup, kind of a cool old console, but again, that's getting replaced as well. And like I said, the 25 horse Mercury motor on the back is getting replaced with a 60 horsepower. It's gonna scoot right along now. While I'm uninstalling the engine components, Marty's going around. This is where we start with every boat. And he's uninstalling the railings. So we'll get those out of the way. You're gonna pull all the screws or bolts. Every boat's a little different. Pull those out of the floor supports, and then we'll take the railing off in a couple big sections, and that way everything keeps moving along. That's how we do it. We've got multiple hands here, but if you're doing it at home, start with the railings, get that off, then move on to your interior stuff. And I should mention, if you're gonna reinstall everything, maybe you're just doing new flooring, and you're keeping the railings and everything else, maybe replacing the furniture, this kind of stuff, what I'll do is I'll measure the distance from the front railing and the side railing so I can put that back in place, or you could trace that board and cut holes in the new board. And then the railing, in this case, luckily, it's actually drilled through the rub rail. So as long as I get the rub rail back in the right position, this railing will go right back in the right position, which will help line everything back up to put it back together accurately. Marty needs my help. All right, we got to get these. This is always going to happen almost on any boat, especially when you have a big front deck like this. But he's underneath, and I can just, you ready? Yep. We'll go to this side. This is where it helps to have two people. If you don't have two people, lock a vice grip onto the bottom side, onto the nut, come up on top, and drop that whole thing, and that'll work. I've had to do that plenty of times. But I think the front of the railing's ready to come off. Yeah, there it is. Here we go. Do this right, guys. Don't use screws here. These should be bolted through the floor with a stainless nut on the bottom and a washer, because this is the last thing. If that floor starts to get soggy, you don't want the captain's chair tipping over while you're driving. Just in case you had to take a quick squatty potty.
That's amazing.
Do you want that on your next boat?
That's genius.
It seems sanitary. How I'm approaching removing the controls and the engine items is I'm gonna go ahead and keep all of this intact. I do have to pop this cover off and pull a few screws. The ignition is here. That's gonna be on a separate harness. I'm going to pull everything off of the engine in the back of the boat, pull it all through here, keep it intact to go with this motor, as opposed to unhooking here. If I were re-rigging this motor, I would probably unhook from here and then reinstall on the new console these items. But in this case, this console is gonna go, and I'm gonna unhook and pull this straight out with everything still intact. Pretty common motor in the late 90s. I think this motor is actually a 1998, it looks like, so maybe a little newer than the boat, who knows. But it's gonna get a new steering cable, so we'll show you how we unhook this. And then we're gonna unhook all of this wiring, shift throttle cables, battery cables from here, from the engine, and pull them all through the boat in order to uninstall this motor. we've got to unhook the ignition harness here. That'll pull right out. This little grommet will pull out. And then I can get at my shift throttle cables right down here, which is just going to be a series of clips. So we'll show you how that works too. So this ignition harness has a couple clips on it that are holding it together. Just helps hold that 8-pin harness in place. So I'm going to pop that off. And that will allow me to unplug it, just like that. 8-pin harness comes out. We have a couple trim tilt wires over here as well. We're just going to pop those out of the bullet connectors. Those come unplugged easy. And now I'm ready to feed this harness back out the front of the engine. So we've got just a big rubber grommet here. I open that up, and that will allow me to pull that harness right out. So item 1, gone. Now we're going to look inside here. We have a clip mechanism. I release that, and that's going to allow these shift throttle cables to pull straight out. So they're kind of in this little boot system here that holds these barrels in place, and that's what allows you to fine tune your throttle and your shift. They're kind of adjustments. We'll show you what those look like when we pull them out. But those are free here now. What we've got to do is free the cable ends right here by popping that out. Just this little plastic clip here. And then there's going to be yet another clip on the bottom. That's the cable end that comes on. This clip is going to pop out and allow me to free that up. And then you can see that second clip down in the bottom on that bottom cable. That's the shift cable. We're going to pop that clip up, and that'll allow that cable to pop right off. With that out of the way, this bottom cable will slide right off. So that's free. Now we're just going to free this top cable, which is connected to the throttle. We've got that clip off. Now we got to open this mechanism to pop this cable off. So with this clip undone, this is actually going to slide right out. That was holding the cable in place down here. So now that can drop right out of there, and we have both cables free. Put this clip back in so the next user or installer can utilize that clip, not have to replace it. Fun fact on this motor, if you own one of these parts, sometimes if you use Yamaha parts, since this is a Yamaha power head and components, it'll be a little cheaper than the Mercury parts. So keep that in mind if you're ever working on one of these. But this has that Yamaha choke system and everything. It's a Yamaha power head. Mercury's been good over the years of utilizing that sort of technology instead of having to engineer their own. So everything's unhooked here. I'm going to go ahead and pull the shift throttle cables out. We'll unhook the battery cables. Those will stay with the motor. And then I can pull everything through the boat, and we'll go uninstall our controls, and I'll show you how to uninstall the steering cable at the helm as well. The steering cable back here is just a series big aluminum nut. Occasionally you'll have to hold this motor mount nut, the steering tube nut, with another big wrench, but this will just back right off. And this side, the steering bar, this always stays with the outboard. We're going to undo this nut, is just a 9/16 with a washer on each side. We'll undo that. The cable just pulls straight through, and then we can uninstall that steering cable, get ready to put in a new one. This one's a little tricky because I'm not going to be able to get this whole steering cable out until I pull the motor off. So I'm going to undo everything. When we lift the motor, I'll pull the cable. I just don't have enough room to work because of this little hole. So that's pretty common to have to take the motor off to swap your steering cable. In this case, it's getting a new motor anyway, so I'm happy. But if I were just replacing that steering cable, it'd be a little bit of a bugger to have to take the motor off to pull the steering cable, and then keep the motor off, and put the new steering cable in with the motor off, then bolt it back on. A lot of extra steps there, but in this case, I think we're going to get away just fine with having to install a new motor anyhow. Shift throttle cables are out as well. We'll cut these zip ties right off, and then this motor is basically ready to unbolt. It's just these 4 3/4 inch nuts and bolts on each side. Not a big deal, pretty quick and easy. Heavy motor, but we'll put it on the rack, and this one I think is getting traded in, so it'll go to the marina for trade-in to help cover some of that cost of the new 60 horse. Let's get at the control box now. Marty's here, just in case we need him. This top cover is gonna pop right off. And these old ones, it's just kind of squeeze it, get it over this detent here, and that will come off, and it'll expose 4 screws that we can pull, and then this whole unit's gonna slide right out. So on this one, the bottom popped out pretty easy, just pushed up, and then that comes right off. Usually I'll save this to be my hardware bucket. And then it's kind of hit or miss on this. Sometimes these are simply screws, like in this case. Once in a while you'll get them where somebody put a little bolt in, but it's a pretty heavy screw. This thing's been in there a long time. I don't think it was ever gonna have a problem. We'll save these to keep with this control box. So just like that, this can now pull out of here. I'm gonna have to free up some stuff underneath in order to get it there, so I'll have to go under the boat, undo those zip ties, get it ready to pull. This trim tilt harness here runs underneath the dash. Typically on this style motor, there's going to be a quick connect plug underneath there. We'll have to undo, and then you should have a neutral safety wire that's connected to this main harness that's going to keep you from starting the motor when it's in gear. This ignition switch, I pulled the key out. This is usually just a big nut that's holding it in place on the dash, and that's going to pull out. You might have a washer behind it. A little locking action. All gone. But this whole panel is going to pull right off this console, which will give a great look as to what it's inside, and that'll show how to uninstall that steering system a lot better too. We've got this opened up. That panel came right off a series of screws. You got a stereo in here. All your speaker wires. This is where everybody gets so intimidated, and I mean, not for bad reason. I would say that's pretty scary looking, but we're just doing our steering and the ignition system and the shift throttle box on this. So everything goes down through a hole, but let's talk about that wiring. This is our neutral safety. It's a red and yellow wire that's going to come across. As you can see, it's just spliced right in. I'm just going to cut this, and that way it's ready to rewire into another control box. This was the ignition switch that we pushed down through. And then this is that trim tilt harness. So that's just going to unplug here. No problem. That will stay with the control box until it's reinstalled. And then, like I said, I'll cut these wires, and that'll allow me to free that control box up. I just have to pull these shift throttle cables from the engine. We're just going to pick a place to cut. That comes out. Unplug this. Now my ignition harness is mostly free. In this case, I do have a gauge harness as well. Kind of cool. This had gauges. It has a tack. Everything's wired up in there. We're not going to worry about that. The new motor is getting a new tack. So if you're doing this and you're reinstalling everything, I would go ahead. We're just going to unplug the gauge harness. But if it's all hard spliced in here, just label with some painter's tape and make a number 1, 2, 3, 4, and just line up your wires as you cut them so that everything's labeled so you can splice it back together. This makes it easy on me. All I gotta do is unplug here, and then this can stay with the gauge and everything else can go. I will probably save this harness because it's a $30, $40 part, something I can use in the future. And on these old JC U-shaped Toons, we've got a few holes there that everything runs through. So we're working these cables through. It's kind of a two-person job here. Keep pulling. There's really only room for, there you go, for one to go through at a time because these big barrels get stuck on there. But we'll feed these up through and then right up through the console, and then those will be free. We can pull the control box. Something that helped me on this, I shifted it all the way into forward and accelerated all the way. And what that did is it shortened these cables, because if I shift it back to neutral, they both extend, and they might even be way extended. If it shifts just barely into reverse at idle, those are way extended. So if I go all the way forward, I get away with a shorter cable. And that's how we got it to pop through that hole. Now I got to pull our key switch ignition harness. I've got the whole ignition harness pulled. We'll zip tie that into a bundle. Shift throttle cables are out, which means I can now pull my control box out, bring those cables on through. Let's talk steering system. This is a little bit older style system. It's the same style cable. It's a rotary cable. The new ones, they're usually a QC quick connect. All I need to do to release this is undo this bolt here, because there's a detent on the cable itself, the brass fitting, that this will release. So I don't need to undo this whole box. The only other thing I could do is undo this one, and that would allow me to pull this little tube off that protects the cable. This is a reusable system, but on this case, getting the new motor and everything, we're going to do a whole new system, new rotary helm and everything on the new console. So we'll save this, we'll leave it with the console. Somebody will make good use of it, I hope. So again, it's a 7/16 nut. I'm just going to take that right off. There's a bolt attached, but it's got something to stop the head from spinning on the back side. So you only need one wrench or one socket. And then this, once I pop that bolt out, so I can get where you can see here. So this bolt is actually what's holding the steering cable in position. Just like that. I can pull this right out. And that is what actually, when you turn the wheel, that's what actually pushes and pulls inside of the sheathing to steer your motor. Kind of cool. The other styles you're going to see are the quick release, which this little detent just pops into place, this little groove here, and then there's a quick release button, a spring-loaded button to release it. And then the other style is very similar to this one, but there's going to be 2 bolts and nuts holding that cable in place. So keep that in mind, but this is a pretty common, especially on older boats, you're going to see something just like this. I'm going to put that bolt and my nut and washer back on so it's there, doesn't get lost. Side note, this thing is greasy as all get out. Put a plastic bag over it or something if you want to stay, keep yourself from getting all dirty. This is just going to get thrown away because the sheathing, this plastic sheathing, is all cracked on the backside. So it's only a matter of time at that point before water gets into the cable and everything seizes up. That's what happens when it hits your shoulder, that greasy little bugger. Last thing to do, getting the old outboard off, is going to be to take off that steering cable or unhook the steering cable so everything's free. So this again is just a 9/16 nylock nut on this end, and this is the steering bar for the motor. So you're going to want to keep that together. Don't unhook it from the motor because it's unique to each motor. The way they bend, the way they interact with the steering cable is all different. So keep that in mind. You're going to have a washer and a nut, and then a washer on the top side. This will just pull right out. We'll put that washer and nut back on, and now the cable will actually pull out that side. But before we do that, I got to undo this aluminum nut. Usually when I go to turn that, both of those nuts are turning. That's not going to work. So what I need to do is put another wrench on this one and hold it in opposition so I can back this off. So I've got my one adjustable wrench on the nut that's on the tilt tube of the motor, steering tube, and then I can work these in opposition. I actually need to tighten it down first before I can get this one to loosen. Now, because I tightened the tilt tube on the motor, the steering tube, now I can undo this aluminum nut, and that will allow then for the steering cable to be pulled straight out of that steering tube. Once the aluminum nut's off, this will pull through. Again, we got to undo the motor because this hole is in the way, but this will just continue to pull out until it's completely out. And this console is all freed up now. The other wiring, since we're not reusing this, the other wiring got cut. Somebody could easily splice into that with their own harness or fuse block. That's not a problem. But we got everything we need unhooked. So now I can go ahead, pull these screws out, and the console's coming right off. This is likely the original flooring and everything from JC Marine because they use a tongue and groove plywood that I've only ever seen from the manufacturers, and Marty got lucky on this one. There was no glue on this floor whatsoever, just stapled around the edges. It's a 26-year-old boat. It's held up that long like that, but we definitely use adhesive to hold everything down when we put the vinyl on. We're scraping off the old glue, silicone, tar tape. Marty's got the torch, and what it does is just hits it with some heat from underneath or on top, whichever way. And when you heat up that aluminum, it gets that glue or tar tape and stuff to kind of melt away to where you can scrape it off with a scraper. So we'll do that for this wood that's glued on as well. One of our favorite things to do to modernize a boat during a restoration project is to make the back squared off and extend the transom back where the motor hangs behind, and we make that a full board. If you look at this boat, this is a 2013, so way more modern. This is how it came from the factory with a straight across. The transom comes back. That's exactly what we're gonna do to this boat, because this boat, if you could picture it when the deck was on, the board came here and then back. So now I'm gonna put a big heavy, this is 2-inch, it's 1/4-inch wall. So this is a super heavy piece of aluminum. I mean, aluminum alone was a couple $100, but that's gonna go straight across the back. Transom will unbolt, slide back, motor will hang off the back, and that gives us plenty of deck space in the rear. Fun project, let's get at it. And there you have it. We have our real beefy last cross member on. It's about 14 inches from the back of the cross member to the transom. That'll leave us plenty of room. And what this does is it gives me some space to leave maybe 6 inches of deck. That'll give more room to get to the ladder, but it'll also give more room for the motor to tilt forward without hitting. We never want the motor to hit the railings if we can help it. We did go through, there's some manufacturers who do this type of work with their hardware just to reinforce, make it strong. But what we'll do is we'll lay our board on top, and then we'll hit it with a hammer or step on it, which will leave an imprint. And then we'll go and we'll cut out just into the plywood on the bottom where each bolt head is all the way down the way there. So lots of hardware, 3/8-inch bolts in the transom, 5/16 holding everything together. And the little bit of welding that we did was to add, these are goofy cross members up here. They're 2 3/8 inch. So this is a 2-inch tube with 3/8 inch flat stock. We just basically stitched it together so we have spacers so everything lines up and we get a flat floor. So as you can see now, with those holes drilled out with that hole cutting bit, that backboard will sit on there nice and flush. You can see the little hole we milled out. That'll ride in there. Never know it's there. But that gives us a nice structure through this heavy walled tube. It's gonna work really well. We are ready to lay some tar tape. So every seam where 2 boards meet, we'll get tar tape, strip across. That comes with the flooring kit from PontoonStuff.com. We got our transom all in. I gotta replace the transom board, but that can wait for now. So we're gonna get this deck in vinyl today. Then we can take care of the transom, installing the new motor while we're waiting for the glue to cure. But what you see here, this is a JC. These are short. They're only 2 3/8 inch tall cross members. So the problem you run into there is that once you put the deck on, it gets really hard to work, especially once you put the rub rails on. So we got to get in there, and we ran our main wiring harness. I ran that on the farthest inside setting there, the holes, so that once that's in, it's done. What you get when you get the PontoonStuff harness, this is probably the best item that I can recommend for any redo or rebuild or restoration project. This is the plug that will plug into our switch panel. Quick and easy. I'll just unhook this pigtail and plug that white plastic plug in. This is gonna sit where the console is gonna be installed. So right here, then we run this shorter section. It's got our gray with green, gray with black, and our horn wire, and then a ground that they all share. That goes forward to the front of the boat, where it will then split. So these wires just, they all are connected, but they split. So we end up with a short end, which is gonna be our starboard side for our nav lights, headlights, and horn. The ground splits, so they all get their own ground for each accessory. And then this splits over. It's the same colored wires because they're gonna hook up the same. So all my nav lights go on the gray with green, both headlights go on the gray with black, and then the grounds go across. So those run to the port side. When we come back, we have a big red wire, big black wire. We have a gray with blue. That's our anchor light or stern navigation light. We have a ground wire for that. And then we also have aerator or just another 10 amp accessory wire. This would be aerator, live well, or lights, whatever you want to use it for, that runs to the switch panel as well. So lots of wires, but don't be worried. They make this simple in terms of what goes forward, what stays at the console, and then what runs back. You'll see I leave my stern light just behind the console. That will wire up to the Bimini top. And then our power in wires and our ground and that other accessory wire stay together. They'll run back. The battery's gonna go on that port side in the rear. This is that tar tape. This is just part of a roll. It comes in a bigger roll. But what it is this tar material, it's sticky. You need to make sure that your cross member's cleaned off of wood, other adhesive, that kind of thing. But this is a peel back. So what I'm gonna do is just run it all the way across, only where the two boards meet. You don't need it on every cross member. The wood's gonna squish into this really well, so it's not gonna raise your seams or anything. But we're gonna run this. I'm just gonna try to get it as even as possible right across this cross member. We'll take it all the way to the other side, and then I'll cut off the excess. I'll cut that off, and then I usually just run my hand over it just to make sure it's pushed down really well. We've got the boards just laid on here to start, and we always start on the back board first. What I'm gonna do is get it lined up with this cross member. We're gonna split that right in half, and then what we're gonna be able to do is clamp that down, double check our measurements, and then we can start screwing in. We'll use self-tapping screws on these, mainly because this is plenty of width to work on the seams. Sometimes if this is a thinner piece of aluminum, I'll go ahead and use a deck bolt, more of an elevator bolt with a flat top, and that'll hold the seams together. But in this case, plenty of space to run the self-tappers. We've got our first board. The back row is all screwed in with self-tappers. We go about every 16 to 24 inches on those. That's 5 screws on an 8-foot. On the seams, we'll usually end up doing 6 on each board, so we'll go a little bit tighter. That helps hold those seams together. But once you get the backboard in, we have another video on our channel about this. Once I get the backboard in, we're gonna lift the front edge up just high enough to get at our tar tape, and then I can peel this tar tape right off, drop that board on, and then we're gonna bring the other board, this board, we're just gonna line our fingers up, make sure there's no wood chips or anything that's gonna get between the boards. But we're just gonna line our fingers up on the edge, hover it for a second, make sure we're lined up. You good? Mm-hmm. Push it in nice and tight to that back board, and then go ahead and drop it. And that board is now in place as well. So what we'll do is we'll put the rest of our screws in on the seam to hold this in place. And then we just keep repeating the steps as we go forward. So on this deck, pretty standard. What we did is we put all the seams in all the way. So all the boards are fixed at the seams. Now we're gonna run the chalk line. We'll mark all the in-between cross members, and we can run our deck screws there. We've got the floor all prepped now, especially on these older boats, 26-year-old boat or so, and as they get older, it tends to be a bigger issue. Those boards on the seams, usually they need a little light sanding just to make them nice and smooth transition so you don't feel anything under your feet. So we did that. We swept the deck all off, it's ready for vinyl. This one's getting a tan woven teak plank. So we'll show you the process for laying that. We'll make that its own video too, so you can always look at that video for reference as well. This will ship straight to your house. FedEx will bring you, your FedEx driver might not be super happy because it's heavy and it takes up half of his truck, but they will deliver this straight to your house for you to install. We've got it, the wrapping cut off. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna spread it out across the boat lengthwise. I think what gets people intimidated with this floor is that they're afraid they're gonna see the lines crooked. We're gonna show you those steps to make sure your lines are nice and straight and how to glue it down. But first things first, I gotta stretch it the length of the boat so I can trim off some excess in the front and the back. So we've got it spread all the way. I'm gonna make sure I have excess on the back and the front here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna trim most of that excess off. Normally we leave it hang, we flip it side to side, but on this, I need to measure a point on my plywood as well as on my vinyl so I can line these lines up. And the best way to do that is to make sure that I'm cut flush with the vinyl on the wood. I'm gonna measure first on the side, front and back, of how much overhang I have there. That way I know that I'm relatively square across the boat, so when I make my cut, it's gonna help keep things square there too. This roll of vinyl is a little bit wider than 8.5 feet, so keep that in mind. This is only an 8-foot deck, so I am gonna have quite a bit of overhang on each side, usually a few inches. I've got things squared up on the sides, so now I can go ahead and trim that front piece. We'll take our measurement to line up our lines and go from there. I've cut it pretty much flush on the front, maybe leave a 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch of overhang. We'll do the same on the back. I've got a square cut. This is the important part. I'm gonna take a tape measure. I'm gonna measure out to roughly halfway. I usually end up leaving it a little bit under, so halfway would be right here. So we're gonna actually line up, this line is pretty close right here to 47 inches. So what I'm gonna do is make a mark on my plywood first at 47 inches. Now I'm gonna go to the back and measuring from the same, I measured from the starboard side, same side, I'm gonna measure in 47 inches. That way I can pick this line to line up with my 47-inch mark. So I'm gonna do my best to get this line lined up with that mark on my plywood on the front and the back. Then I'll clamp the front and pull everything snug and tight to the back, make sure that's still lined up, and that generally is gonna make all of my lines nice and uniform and straight. So I've got that front lined up. I'm gonna put a clamp on that to hold it in place. We'll go to the back and line that up. We're lined up front to back. Now I'm gonna grab an extra set of hands and we're gonna just pull everything snug before we roll it once lengthwise. That way we stretch everything out, get it in a position, then we'll roll one last time to make sure any of the big bubbles are rolled out of it. I'm gonna take this is about a 4.5 foot wide piece of PVC pipe, 3-inch. I'm gonna roll it lengthwise to get rid of any more wrinkles or bubbles. Then we'll clamp front and back and get to gluing. Everything's nice and square. If you look down the lines, they are straight. So what I'm gonna do is add a piece of wood that just gives me a little bit broader area to clamp. We're gonna go right at that halfway point. Our line is still lined up. I'm gonna do the same thing on the back. Clamps are in place. Our lines are still lined up. We're gonna peel one side back at a time. We've got the D128 Deckmate adhesive. We'll apply it to 1/2 with a paint roller, short nap brush, and then we'll roll everything back, roll it out so everything's held down to the deck, and repeat the same process on the other side. We're gonna time lapse this because it's gonna take us about 30, 45 minutes to get everything done, but we'll speed it up for your sake. So as you saw, we laid the glue, We rolled it out with a PVC pipe, putting my body weight down on it, just trying to put a bunch of pressure down to roll any wrinkles out, smooth everything out. Lines still look great and straight. So we're now gonna remove our clamps from the center. Then we're gonna roll this other side back and apply the glue just like we did. We'll put it back down. It's gonna take almost a whole gallon on each side. If you apply it thick, just keep working it till it's uniform and then smush it down with the vinyl. That's gonna help get that felt backing on the vinyl to stick to the deck. But we'll do that, we'll roll it out, and then I just take a razor blade or a sharp box cutter, and that will help you trim the edges. Other side is rolled out. Last steps are gonna be trimming the excess, so we just have nice exposed wood edge. Our rub rail will cover that up, so don't worry about that. And then we'll run a staple, T50, a 1/2 inch staple, about every 4 to 6 inches all the way around the boat, just to hold everything down, help that glue cure. And especially if you have a rub rail that sandwiches the plywood and the flooring, carpet or vinyl, you'll really want to staple to make it a lot easier to get that deck trim back on. So Corey's running a pneumatic staple gun. This is a $35 staple gun from Home Depot. It's an Arrow brand. Works great, gets the job done, and that's just gonna help hold down that edge, let that glue cure up, and help to get the rub rail on. This is a beautiful floor, one of my favorite floors to lay. The lines give it a next level sharp look. Awesome, it's gonna look awesome when we get, awesome, a lot of awesomes. It's gonna look great when we get the furniture up here, the railings on. This is an awesome option. There it goes again. It's a great option for your floor. So this transom is pretty beefy in terms of a 1996 style transom. It does still have some plywood involved, which is totally fine. It's not gonna hurt anything. We're putting 60 horsepower Tohatsu on this, which is around 250 pounds, give or take. So it's not gonna be an issue at all with that. What we're gonna do here though is we have to take out, there's a couple brackets inside to free the wood. Sometimes your wood's gonna slide out the top. In this case, it's actually one big piece that wraps over the top. So there's brackets on the inside, just angle brackets. They're about 3/16 aluminum, pretty heavy duty. We're gonna pull, there's 4 bolts out of that. And then this wood piece is just gonna pull right straight out. And then luckily for us, this engine that we're gonna hang has the same bracket that mounts to the transom as the 25 horse behind me here, because they both have trim and tilt. Doesn't matter that this is a Mercury and we're going to a Tohatsu, the bolt pattern will line up. So once I put my new plywood back in here, I can just drill my holes back through the aluminum. There's already holes in the aluminum plate here, and it's gonna center everything back up. We'll be good to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and take these brackets off and then we'll trace our wood. We got all the hardware pulled out. These were those brackets that were in each corner that just basically sandwich the wood into the aluminum. Now, our transom board will pop right out of there. And this is the same way they did it. This is probably from the factory. I guess it could have been replaced at some point in time, but by the looks of everything on this boat, it seems like it's all original. So at the factory, they take 2 layers of plywood. What this does, especially if you're doing it on a transom that you do not have aluminum, so you can see this is aluminum backing all welded in. It's an 1/8 inch aluminum, so it's gonna add a ton more stability than wood alone. But the reason that I prefer plywood is because we've got 12 layers of ply that are glued together. So we've got glue, ply, glue, ply. So if one layer is a little weaker, not the end of the world, because there's 11 more layers of ply with glue between holding them together. If you get one weak spot in a solid 2x material or a solid board of any type, you might break right off. Again, especially if you don't have aluminum. I always recommend add aluminum to your old transom if you can to reinforce it. In this case, I think this is a great little transom setup. So I'm gonna trace this, the outline on this plywood that we glued together, new treated, marine grade treated, it's glued together. I am gonna add about a 1/2 inch on this side. So what I'll do is I'll trace this side and then I'll slide everything over just a 1/2 inch. and we'll add that, and hopefully that will fit in, and it'll just take up more space. There was a little gap here where the plywood had some space there. We've got our new transom. We traced, made it a little bit bigger. And look at that, slides right into place. So what I'm gonna do is put these corner pieces back in place. We'll start with that side first. That will hold that back in place. Then we can drill through from the outside and get our other bolts in place. I had a little piece of flat stock 3/16 aluminum that's gonna go in here across the top. It's just gonna reinforce. And then I had some massive thick washers that we'll put on the bottom. Just probably overkill, but why not? That way the wood doesn't get, the hardware doesn't sink into the wood and make it rot faster. Let's hang this motor. It's raining outside. You can hear that, raining pretty hard. We've got this Tohatsu 60 horse. I'm a realist. You can't get a 60 horsepower outboard anymore that is made in the USA. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Mercury 60 is made in China. Still Mercury Engineering, great engines. Tohatsu is made in Japan. Suzuki, Yamaha, Honda, they're all made in Japan. There is no more Evinrude. So go with what works. Tohatsu is an awesome brand. They've been around for the longest time. They were #2 in the world, right behind Yamaha. The 60 horse has a 5-year warranty. It's gonna be an awesome engine, really powerful. Customer's gonna love it, I have no doubt about that. So we're gonna get this uncrated and hung on this transom here. If you're not super comfortable, or a dealer's not okay with selling you a motor directly like this, take it to a dealer, have them hang it. Every motor that is sold now comes with a rigging box. So that's that box over on the corner of the boat, but it's got the hardware I need in here ready to go that the manufacturer wants on their motor. So we've got that. There's some other parts in there that we'll end up rigging, like the motor bracket, the steering arm, etc. But tonight our mission is just to hang this outboard and be ready to rig it. But we need to make sure when we tilt it all the way forward that we're not going to hit the railings. It's a pretty tall little motor, but that's why we got to install it now. Quick tip, if your bracket's not lining up and you can't tilt the motor on your engine hoist, just trim your motor up and your bracket will move to the transom. I like to tighten the top bolts first, get everything secure. Then I'm going to tighten the lower bolts. Then I'm going to go through, I like my impact, but I'm going to hand tighten everything pretty much as tight as I can get it. Big 1/2-inch bolts in there. On metric, it's going to be 17 millimeter, maybe a 19 millimeter combo. So that's where I go when I'm installing a motor. There you have it, Tohatsu 60. We've got it floating a little bit. So if you look at the transom here, this is totally fine. The transom, where the bracket is bolted to the transom, that's doing the work and taking the load. This can hover a little bit. Sometimes your bolts won't even line up without this hovering at least like 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch. So there's actually one more hole we could go up. I don't think that's going to be necessary. We're in the 3rd hole on this bracket. I think it's going to work really well. Again, I think it's going to allow the boat to lift without cavitating and without spraying water everywhere. Call that a day?
Yeah. Next time I get to talk about cavitation.
She's a cavitation queen. Today is the day where we go ahead and unbox all the furniture, see where our railings are at, these railings. Keep in mind, they're not quite available yet, but hopefully, my fingers are crossed too, that they're available in the spring or summer of 23. So I will absolutely announce when they're available. I'll be excited. I hope you are too. We're getting seats in, not installed or anything yet. And then we start to piece everything together. We got the motor on last night. That's got a long ways to go too. We just kind of get all our materials up on the boat, some accessory stuff, console. I'll cut everything out on that before we put it up on the boat. But we're just piecing things together, laying it out, and then we start assembling, and it kind of goes pretty quick from there. We're waiting on a few things to come in, but that's perfect time for us to get into the console. So I've traced out my templates for my switch panel, stereo, steering helm system. So that's going to be a brand new steering system. We'll install that on this, and then I'll put my tachometer. Once I get a few things in, I've just got a tack with an alarm gauge. I'll probably go just off center up here to the right, but I want to get the switch panel in to see exactly where that ends up. And then we'll also climb in there, and I'm going to cut my holes for my speakers in the boat. We're doing 4 speakers off of this stereo unit. Let's talk steering system really quick. You can get the same steering system we're using here. It's a rotary quick connect from, I believe, Teleflex. But that's what PontoonStuff.com sells, is a rotary kit, quick connect. First thing you gotta do is install this bracket, and this is gonna sit down into the dash. So if we look at our console here, this piece, I have a little template, but you could essentially just trace this onto your dash, kind of like a hexagonal shape there. That's gonna go in. I always put the 2 holes up, that way I get more leverage steering wise. From here, I just need to drill 3 5/16 holes. There's hardware in the bags for that. Once I get this in place, it's again 5/16 bolts. It's a 1/2-inch socket you'll need on the inside and outside. They're a nylock nut. There's a washer. They'll stay on there forever. Once you get that in place, the next piece that tends to confuse people is the actual, what I call this, the helm itself. So this is that rotary piece, and it's labeled. It says insert cable in this end. So there's a little clip here that's going to help hold it in place. But essentially, you're just going to push your cable in, the end of the cable. It's a real spirally looking piece. And then you turn your wheel, and that's going to draw it all the way in. The excess is going to stick out this side, which is totally fine because this can be inserted in here. You hear that click into place. Then I take my pin and I can slide that in. It just helps lock it in. But if I ever need to release it, I can use that pin, push in this detent, and it's going to allow that to come back out if I have enough sets of hands. The pin works the same on the other side. You would push the detent on this side in to pop the cable out. So when I go to install my cable, I will indeed pull this pin. I will just pull it in. You'll hear the cable click, and that's what's going to pop it into place. That's the quick release part. There's a barb on your cable that's going to lock it in place. If you ever need to release it, use that key, push on that detent, and that's going to allow it to release. This key also on the cable side helps lock everything in place. Just an extra safety mechanism, but also gives you a place to store that key. So once I get my little brass piece in, this is going to go in. There's 3 little 7/16 head bolts, 1/4-inch bolts. They're going to hold this in place right here. There's only so many ways that this can rotate. Typically, I point it towards the rail of the boat, which is going to be on the starboard side, so my right-hand side. So usually I'm going to orient it here. Cable will come up from the outside edge of the boat through a grommet into here. Boom, we're done. So I'm going to go ahead, drill my holes, install my brass piece, and then I'll install this. So the way this works, I'll show you in just a second here, but it's going to slide out through that piece. You got a hardware bag with a whole bunch of stuff. These are those longer 5/16 bolts with the 1/2-inch head. You've got screws to hold your bezel cover on here. And then we've got a 1/2 moon key that holds the steering wheel on. Some other stuff that we'll get to, but for now I just need those bigger bolts, washers, and nylock nuts. If you don't have a big piece cut out, this makes it a lot easier, but if you don't, you can work from the backside. If you have 2 people, it would be easier, just have 2 sets of hands. That is in place. Now you'll see how our actual helm is gonna go in. So I just have 3, they're in a bag, 3 little 1/4-inch bolts. Those are gonna go in through 3 of these holes, but you'll see you can't just turn it at perfect angles. It only lines up in certain positions. I like to just get all 3 screws or bolts started, and then from there I can tighten them up. I always say don't over tighten those. They're not when you want to break off because you're not getting them back out. So now my rotary system is in place. We've got a couple last little steps here, one being this bezel piece. It's just going to cover it up, makes it a little sharper finished look. That's going to fit right on. There's just 2 Phillips head screws that come with it, big number 10 screws. Those are going to hold it in place on each side. We'll just line it up the best we can. I'm not going to put my steering wheel on yet. That's the last thing I do because I'm going to get everything else in place and situated. When I put my steering wheel on, this half moon key is going to fit. There's a little groove right here. And this key, it's kind of a snug fit. I usually have to use a wrench to get in there. But that's going to sit in here, and then the steering wheel will slide on. And the key is actually, believe it or not, that's what allows the wheel to turn. So we turn that rotary helm. That pushes and pulls the cable. That's how it works. And then there is a big old washer and lock nut that goes on. So keep those somewhere safe. A lot of times I'll just put this on, put the key in, and I'll tape it in place so it can't fall off. But that way I have everything where I need it for when it's time to go ahead and put the steering wheel back on. Our steering is set for now until we're ready to run the cable in, so we can get to making sure everything else is in position and installed. Everything is going to be plug and play. Our switch panel has just a quick connect plug. Our stereo will plug into this pigtail. Everything's going to be really simple. Even our gauge has quick plug wires in there too. So we'll get everything installed, ready to go, and then we can put this up on the boat. We've got the Deckmate 6.5-inch speaker. We've actually really done well with these. They sound great. They're inexpensive, easy to install. Your plug-in is just right on the back here. So your negative goes to the little terminal, positive to the big. It's labeled for you. Super simple, but I've been really happy with these. I have them in our own boat and they sound great. So cut everything out. I have a little stencil that cuts the right size for most 6.5-inch speakers. If you're installing these, great. Usually most of the speakers on the market will come with a template, you know, something you can trace. But we're gonna go ahead. We've got 2 up front. One, this is gonna be our rear right because it's facing back and it's gonna give us sound to the back. And then we have one more on the corner seat. Corner seats do great for them because if you install them on these benches, you're gonna run into issues with it opening. So if you do need to install it on a bench, go as low as you can with it and it'll have less impedance on the seat opening. So the corners don't have anything to impede, they open. Well, that one, the whole cushion just lifts off, and those, they hinge from the top, from the inside to the aisleway there. We'll get these speakers installed, and then all we gotta do is run wire for them when the time comes. Speakers are all in. Now another thing I gotta move to is building the compartment that's going to support the sun deck. I have to build the frame out of railing pieces. Again, these railings, hopefully all things go perfect, they'll be available spring or summer next year, but they hopefully will have a sun deck option or add-on that's kind of something you can order that would match one of these cushions. But right now I build it and then I have a local upholsterer make me the cushion. So that's what I'm going to work on, is making it'll end up 26 by 60 inches, give or take, so that a big cushion of that size can fit on top. That's the structure built, just a series of panels bolted together. A pad will go on top, tons of storage. It's a great option on any boat that you're restoring. Definitely a more modern look too. Console is ready to have the steering wheel put on, everything plugged in, screwed and bolted to the floor. It's really moving along nicely. We're just at a little standstill, but that is okay. One change we did have to make, and this is common. The doors were originally 24 inches. If we do that, we're gonna have 0 front deck and 0 back deck. This way, we're still gonna have a very small front deck, just a few inches, a couple inches to step on. I don't think there's gonna be any issue there. It's just gonna allow for more space to maximize inside the railings. What we've got going to this point is we have our back railings in for the most part. We have our sun deck housing built in. We've got these back seats in. Just doing what I can on the back of the boat because we're waiting for some stuff on the front. Of course, I forgot to order enough hinges, these lift hinges, to go around, so we can't quite get everything situated fully in the front until we get those hinges, hopefully tomorrow. So for now, I moved on to the console and running our steering cable up under. Something to take note of when you're cutting your hole. So I've cut my hole down through, is to make note of where your cross member is. So you can see that hole is just in front of the cross member. It's gonna give me just enough room to throw my electrical steering cable and everything up through there. This is about the hardest scenario to work with because this is just over 2 inches tall. Not a lot of space in there. The pontoon comes straight up, so I don't have that rounded edge to work with. So I'm gonna feed everything up through there, then I'll put everything through the boot and go from there. Usually I'd put the boot in and just feed stuff up, but I don't have a great angle, so we gotta make the most of it. So now we're gonna run some wiring up through there. Just, again, keep moving as far forward as we can without those pieces we need for the front of the boat. I fed my steering cable up, and if you can see inside here, I've already stuck the end in that says here, insert cable into this tube. You may have to pull the pin that was in there. There's usually a tag on it. Pull that out. You're gonna stick the end of this coiled piece in, and if you turn the wheel to the left, or towards port, it's gonna continue to pull that cable in, and we go all the way until you hear that click. It's now in, the cable can't get pushed out. That's where we want it to be. I'm gonna take that clip and I'm gonna put it in. There's a little groove next to the cable here where I can slide this clip and it holds in. Just an extra security measure, but also a place to keep that clip, because to undo this cable, I would take this clip, push on the D10 and turn the wheel all the way to the right. We're not gonna do that because we want it to stay in place. There we go.
So don't forget to put the grommet on the bottom down there before you put the steering cable in.
I was so excited to show you how to put the steering cable in, I forgot to run my grommet around it. So now I get to do it all over again. So we've moved on to the control box. It's a side mount box, so it's gonna mount right on the railing there. I've got it opened up. It's just a couple screws and this panel comes off in the bottom. We have 2 places for the cables to hook up. So our cable ends look like this. Pretty common for any of the Japanese motors. You're gonna have a thread-on piece because this cable, it's considered a 3300 cable. It's going to latch in here. That's gonna slide right into this little mechanism. It's a catch, and that allows the cable to push and pull to move the motor. So we haven't hooked the motor side up yet. That's important. You're gonna hook your control box up first, because I mount these about halfway on the thread, and that way I have room on the motor side to adjust for fine tuning, shift, and throttle. We've run them up through the floor. So what I'm gonna do is just identify which is shift and which is throttle, and the easiest way to do that is just to advance the throttle. So if I advance this lever, I look for the one that moves. That's that top one. The other way you could do it would be to shift, and the first, lost the cover. First one to move is your shift. So we know shift and throttle. I'm gonna go ahead, there's just a clip system to hold them on. We'll slide our ends over top of those posts. They're all greased up. And always put the bottom one in first in the groove. So shift will go in, then throttle, and then that case, that cover, is gonna hold them in place so that everything can work properly. It's that simple. It's really not complicated. Don't overthink it. This is something, if you unhook it and rehook it, you can do at home. Don't be intimidated by it. We're gonna get this hooked up and mounted back to the railing so we can get to work on the motor side. All right, we got our front railings in. All of our railing support posts are in. Put those on each side of the door. We put them in the back on that big long side panel, and that just helps to reinforce. We put it in the front, and you're climbing in the front, you grab onto the railings. That's gonna keep you from grabbing on and yanking the railings funny or bending anything. So I've got front seats all in. I wait to put the cushions on, the butt cushions, until the very end. So I'm gonna go in, I gotta put my LED strips on a bunch of seats, and then I can drop my speaker wire and LED power wires down through the floor, run them to the console, and that'll get us one step closer to buttoning up the stuff on the console and the switch panel. We've moved on to our Bimini. So the way I address this is I kind of mock up where it's gonna lay. You can see on this side, I set everything up. And then once I know where I want it to go, I start with the front brackets, and I just work my way back, and then we'll put the frame up and the Bimini on, and that'll be moving right along in the back here. I did pick up the sun deck from the upholsterer today, which you can order this material from PontoonStuff, take it to a local upholsterer. I do not do upholstery, not this guy. And it matches the seats perfectly. He integrates that same sort of design with the tan and the navy. It's all the same colors that you see on the premium seats here. It's a really cool tie-in there. We still got to hinge that and put the gas hinge to support it. But the gas tank will go in the middle, battery will go on the other side. We got the Bimini frame all mounted on. Just tying up the wires right now on the top side. This is the last little speaker wire I got to pull down. Then I can vacuum these seat bases out, at least the lean back and the benches, and I can put those seat cushions on. I do still have to run my LED headlights and LED navigation lights that'll come through the front and side of that corner panel. They come into the seat and down through the floor. So we're not quite done yet with the front two seats, but we're getting there. For our wiring harness, we left this hanging. The big white plug is going to go through. I unhooked this pigtail. You would use this if you're rigging to an old switch panel or just redoing your electrical but keeping your dash and everything the same. You could splice in there, but this is going to plug and play with our switch panel that we've already installed. So this will go through first, and then we'll just feed speaker wires and everything else as we go. Let's talk speaker wire and under seat LEDs. These go in the toe kick there. And what I do on these is I put the adhesive strip on. It comes in a 3M strip that holds the actual light strip. And you'll see down here, there's a screw sticking through. So I'm gonna file that flush, just quick and easy. They're little tiny screws, little stainless screws, but I screw them in to the base. In addition to that adhesive, it's a peel off adhesive 3M. With this material, the texture that is, they just don't stick great. So I add screws, that way they're in. So we have one under this seat, under this seat. And what I've done is joined them here. So I have my power and negative coming in here, black and red. Power and negative coming from here. I splice my powers together. I splice my negatives together. And then, this is real thin, this is probably 20 gauge. What I'm gonna do to run power to them is I'm gonna run one strand of this 2-in-1, so it's a power and ground 16 gauge. It tends to work really well. And then at the same time, I've got two holes here. I'm gonna get under the boat, I'm gonna pull my speaker wire, 16 gauge speaker wire. Works really well, I get this on Amazon. I've had really good luck with it, easy to work with. Seems to be really tough and thick coated, not the cheap chintzy stuff. And then this is also off Amazon. Just low voltage cable, works well, doesn't scuff. So I've been happy with that too. I'm gonna push them down through those holes, through the deck, and I'll line my spools up here side by side. What I'll be able to do is just pull from the bottom and they'll unravel as I go. I'll run it across the boat to the starboard pontoon, up and to the dash right there. Pulled, this is the speaker wire, that's the LED, the underseat LED wire. Those are pulled up. I just tie them off on the steering cable. That gives me a couple extra feet, and that way I can uniform all my wires as I pull them through. So we'll leave those there for now. I'll label this as my rear left speaker. It's in that corner seat. And I was able to put the seat cushions on. We've got armrests on. So the back seating, speaker, LEDs is essentially done. We got to put the Bimini top on. We can still do that today. But first is I'm going to go ahead and put the captain's chair in so I can line up for my controls. So here's a look at how I install the LEDs. These are LEDs from PontoonStuff.com. I've got my 3M, the adhesive strip is pushed against the seat base, but then I also put a screw on this one. It's just a short little guy. Put a screw in the middle. I feed my LED strip in, and then I have a little hole that punches through into the seat base. And in this case, it's going to go down the hole down here with the speaker wire, and that goes under the boat to the side to the console. Everybody's happy. I'm going to show a little diagram of how I wire all of these LEDs together to make it into essentially one switch to power the LEDs in the boat. On this setup, I think we have enough switches. We might have a front LED and a back LED switch, but either way, I'm going to join all these front LEDs by combining all of the powers and all of the grounds and then running those to the console. And what that does is that with 16 gauge wire, combining them all, I can tie all the powers and all the grounds together, that power being red wire, black being the ground wire, and I can tie them all together and put them all on the same switch or two different switches depending on how I decide to do it, and we can power all these LEDs. They're very low draw for energy, so 16 gauge wire to combine, I think, is a total of what, 6 LEDs on this boat. That's plenty thick of wire to get that type of power traveled to the lights themselves. We'll show you the diagram right now. Go ahead and hit pause right now if you want to take a deeper look at this diagram. Comment below if you have questions on it. So here we are, coming from the port side front seat. Got my speaker wire and my LEDs. I got to run 18 gauge red and black across to that LED wire. We'll splice those together, chase that back to where this LED and this LED come through the floor. So I'm going to do the same. I'm going to run 18 gauge from that one. Almost fell over. To that one. And then we'll tie those two and these two together to run to the dash. As long as we join our red wires together, I always use heat shrink say that 10 times fast. I always use heat shrink butt splices on everything, above deck, under the deck, everywhere. Stay with me here. We've got LEDs that are joined here with a 16 gauge black and red running across the top of the pontoon. That's this wire. So those are my front LEDs. I have my other front LEDs, the ones that are in the lean back seats, come together here. You'll see the bigger butt splice. That's for a reason, because I'm going to take those very front LEDs, I'm going to run those wires, twist them together with this set of 16 gauge. This is running to the console. So what I'll do is I'll twist these two together. I'll feed them into these butt splices, pinch them down, shrink them up. Then I've got power now run, and 16 gauge is plenty. As long as we're going from big gauge to smaller gauge, we're gonna be okay. So we run from 16 all the way to the front, then 18 connecting the two lights. I'm gonna get this all spliced up and then up to the console, because we'll have both sets of LEDs ready to go at that point. So when I twist my wires together before I put them in the butt splice to make it look something like this, nicely twisted together. In order to get something like this, I start with 2 wires. These are my grounds here. Yeah, there's a little red on there. It's just because I pulled it apart. But I'm gonna start by making them into a Y on each of them. It's hard to do when I'm filming it by myself. But I'm gonna lay it on top of each other. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna twist these 2 together, these 2 together, then I'll twist those 2 separate bundles together and it'll end up looking like that one. Just to give you an idea of how I join them together. Then I can shove that end into the butt splice. I twisted my Y's together. These are my ground wires. Twisted my Y's together, and now I'm gonna twist these 2 together to form one nice point. These are everything coming together. So the grounds stay with the grounds, the powers stay with the powers. Now when I run to my switch, I combine my reds at the dash, my grounds at the dash, and I am good. Just like that, this is that wire for the front LEDs. And what I'm gonna do is put the front LEDs on their own switch, and then I'm gonna put the rear LEDs, is this one, tied a knot in it so I remember which is the rear, and then I can wire into my switches here. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I'll have the first switch will be for the front, the second will be for the back, and then there's still on this boat an extra switch for accessories because we've got that big switch panel, 8 switches. You know, we got the horn is one, the voltage meter is one, but then we also have a whole bunch of accessory switches, 4 of them. So one will go to the stereo here, and then we'll have front LEDs, back LEDs, and then there will still be a spare. One of the really cool things, I love in general, the switch panels from PontoonStuff. They're really user-friendly, plug and play, easy to use. This is gonna be my front LEDs here. So I did, I put a spade terminal on there, and I'm gonna hook that on to the back one of these switches up here, that post. There's no ground coming directly off of that one, so it's all common ground. It all eventually makes its way back to the negative post of the battery. Cool thing, this is an extra horn connection if I wanted to do a horn under the console, but we're running our horn under the front up there where there's actually another orange with white stripe and a ground. So this is just kind of like doubled up on the horn switch. Well, I'm just going to omit that orange and white that's tied into the horn switch. I am going to rob this ground though, because it's all shared in the switch panel. So I'm going to use this ground to ground out my front LED lights, and then I can hook my power directly to the power post on the switch. That way we're grounded, we can create that circuit, and we'll have power. Got the battery hooked up just temporarily. So I don't have my nav lights or docking lights or horn hooked up, but I do have my stereo wired in over here. It's a Garmin Fusion to this switch. So we're good there. That works. Turn that off. And then we have our front LEDs. And then our back LEDs under each bench. So again, that's those 2 switches. Front and back. This is an extra accessory switch. This powers that voltage gauge. Ooh, might need a little charge on my battery there. I'm really happy with how that turned out. Yeah, the boat is a mess. It's one of those times during the process or project where things just get opened and used, but we'll clean that up when we get to start on it tomorrow. Finish hooking up the motor. Most of that's done. We're really close on this project. We've moved on to getting those front seats all done. Before I put the cushions on, I make sure to install those wall mount LEDs if you're doing those. We've got videos for those. I've got my docking lights on each side installed because those wires are gonna go through the railing, boop, through the seat base, and then they all come out underneath. So my nav lights, I'm wiring those up right now, right here. Heat shrinking those in. That's that PontoonStuff harness, super easy. So I just pull where it splits in the front here. I pull my short side, which is gonna be my starboard side. I have a green and a gray and a ground that comes to my nav lights. I've got a gray and a black with a ground that's going to go to my docking lights, and then this orange with white is going to go to the horn, which is actually up under the front seat. Oh man, the lights turned off. Lights back on, we're good to go. So that orange and white goes to the horn, which is one of these two wires that drops straight down under the seat. There's a long lead on this that's going to run across to the port side, and same colored wires, the gray with green and the gray with black with a couple grounds. Those will hook to our docking lights and navigation lights on the other side. Pretty straightforward. You got this. If you got that harness, it's going to be well worth your investment. It makes wiring about 1,000,000 times easier. Check out the rest of our videos for specifics on wiring in the lights and the docking lights. There I am. Most of what we're working on above the boat is done, but underneath here, we've got all of our wiring. So all the way, you can see it way back there. That's all extra wiring I'm going through, and we're tying all that up. So if you look, it's about every 8 to 12 inches, I put a wire clip, and that looks like this. It's a bunch of different sizes that they come in. Just make sure you can get these on Amazon. Make sure if you order them to get stainless, little 3/4 or 1/2-inch screws, Phillips head. Easy to install. They grab your wires, and I just have a variety of sizes here for all the different wires, battery cables, fuel lines, whatever is under the boat that I got to tie up. If you think it'd be a good idea for Tom's Toons to have these maybe on my website as a kit of maybe butt splice connectors, wire clips, hardware, everything you need to do your boat that way. If that sounds like a good idea, please comment that below. Give me some feedback. Let me know if you think it'd be a good idea for a Tom's Toons accessory kit, something that you might need, different butt splices, wire clips, etc. And just like that, all the wires are tied up, front and back, nothing hanging down. River's hanging out. He's always ready to play ball. We're gonna wrap up a few things on the top side. We'll make a list at this point in the project and wrap things up. We got cleats, rub rails, stuff that'll keep moving right along here. This gives you a pretty good idea of what it looks like before we tidy everything up. We have our speaker wires running to our stereo. It's up there. Stereo power running to a switch. We have our tachometer, which is a gauge harness that runs down back to the control box. I did have to extend that. That's pretty common no matter what the manufacturer of your motor is. And then we have our LED lights coming in for the front and the back, and our main harness that runs power from the battery to the switch panel, steering cable, and I think that's pretty much it. Switch panels there. So everything's wired, everything's pulled tight. I always pull things tight from the bottom of the boat first, and then I work my way up here. We have some extra harness that's here, not a big deal. We'll tie that up. But I try to kind of keep things in order of what they go to. So the stereo, I'm going to tie all these wires, just tape them together so they're bundled, and that'll organize that mess. Then I can move on to the LED lights, the accessories. We'll bundle those together here. And then I can take care of this excess, bundle that all up. I'll kind of just divide and conquer for that. And there we have it tied up. So you'll see I separated everything as it comes in. These are tied together. My harness is on its own for the tachometer. Speaker wires are all together, and then our main harness coming in for accessories in that switch panel. They're all bundled by themselves, and then typically what you'll see me do is I like to tie them in. This is a little tape to keep it from moving, and zip ties to take the weight off of the switch panel. So I lift everything up so there's no tension for something to vibrate or wiggle loose, and that gets it off of the floor or the ground. That's just the antenna, which I'll probably actually tie up yet, so it's hanging. That's just the little coil antenna. Awesome little $5 on Amazon for your stereo. It plugs right in. This is how quickly things come together. Front is all done. Back seating is in. Sun deck is in with that gas hinge. Makes it stay open. Easy to open too. What I'm working on right now, got my battery in. Everything runs up through the floor and then right over into the transom. And then we're working on the fuel system. So we have our fuel line up. I like to put the primer bulb between the tank and the water fuel separator, it's easier to fill that separator and push fuel to the engine. Seems to fill faster, a little more efficient, and it's easy access on the boat to just open this up, prime the fuel bulb, and fill the motor, get it ready to start. And then we'll run that fuel line down through the floor, and that actually runs right out through the transom, where we've already got our engine harness and shift throttle cables installed. Fuel line sitting there ready for fitting. It's coming together really fast. This is the fast and furious part. Controls, switch panel, all of our electrical is working at this point. Time to finish things up today. For anyone at home working on JC pontoon restoration, once I put this rub rail on, I can't get at any of this. There's a teeny little gap under there, but that's not much. So remember, if you want to put the cleats on, you're going to through bolt them, which is the only way to do it correctly. You better put your cleats on, then your rub rail, because once that's on there, I'm not getting my hands up in there. That's for sure. Well, the customer is on their way. Last thing we're doing is just putting our snaps on our custom seat covers. So a couple more to go. Do that back side. It zips apart so you can remove half of it if you want to. Nice slip over cover for the helm and the captain's chair too. This boat is all wrapped up, and before we unveil the whole thing, get a look at these seat covers. We have a seamstress who comes in-house and makes these custom to each boat. They're snap-on. So if we're out for a cruise, I can take the helm and the captain's chair covers off, and maybe this front bench for somebody to sit on. I can leave the rest of the boat covered up. Makes it quick and easy, more accessible to get out and boat.